permission that if I can get permission from you to share my screen.
Oh, yes. Okay, is that working?
Awesome. It is.
Perfect.
And I'm gonna just go like this and see. Okay, can you guys see that full screen now?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go through a couple of slides and going to be mindful of everybody's time tonight. I know that it's fun to learn on Zoom, but sometimes it can get really boring, and I don't want it to be boring for you. And so I do have some exciting opportunities. I have some classes of animals that we're going to pull up and talk about towards the end after we learn a little bit about what we're looking for. And so essentially what tonight's going to be is we're going to talk about what livestock judging is. I'm going to give you kind of a crash course of what we look for when we're judging livestock, and then give you guys some ideas as far as some opportunities that are coming up later in the late spring and early summer for opportunities where you can sign up and travel down and learn more about livestock judging and what that looks like. Okay. So, what is livestock judging? So, livestock judging is the study of an animal's form and shape um, in relationship to its intended function. In livestock judging, you carefully analyze an animal's individual traits as compared to the ideal or optimum for that particular species. And what that means is essentially we have a standard of what we look for in animals. And in the show world or livestock judging world, that might look a little bit different than in our commercial world, which is okay. There's oftentimes big arguments about commercial versus show, and they should be the same or they shouldn't be the same. And what I will tell you is the fact is that oftentimes they're not identical, but there are a lot of really good things that we can look for in both. And so what we'll look at is we'll look at different ways that we can best study and judge each individual species for what characteristics and traits we're looking for. And in particular, generally, we look at the four major livestock species, which are hogs, sheep, goats, and cattle. And we can judge them based upon their meat characteristics or marketability. We also can judge them for their breeding characteristics. So sometimes you'll go to a competition and you will judge based upon market. So are they a market animal, or are they going to be headed to be harvested and processed for their meat, or is it a breeding animal? And do we look at their breeding characteristics and what does that look like? So again, we will learn about what that ideal looks like. We're going to have a little bit of a crash course today. But some of the things that are really super helpful is just continuous study. And we'll give you, again, some ideas of how you can do that later on. So we just talked about that. So that's good. So what's in it for you? Okay. Why would you care to do livestock judging? And I want you guys to think about some of these things because they're different than maybe what you might think. Okay. So livestock judging helps to improve critical thinking. It helps you with your communication skills. It helps you with your observation skills. It teaches you self-discipline. It gives you some self-confidence, and then it helps you with some leadership skills. Okay. So when you think about all these things, you think, well, gosh, how do I develop all these different traits and characteristics if I'm just going and I'm looking at animals? But really, when we're looking and evaluating animals, we have to think quickly, we have to think critically. We have to have communication skills because we have to learn how we are presenting a class. We do a thing called reasons. So you guys will learn how to tell a judge essentially why it is that you placed a class of animals the way you placed them, and give descriptions of each of those animals and what you liked and maybe didn't like about them and how that looks. We have to have keen observation skills because oftentimes you're only given a certain amount of time in a judging contest to be able to judge a class of animals. If you're judging in a bigger setting, like if you're judging a fair or a competition, like I really enjoy doing myself, um, you've got to be able to observe animals as they're coming in, maybe 10 to 20 to even sometimes 30 animals at a time, and be able to observe them and make critical thought processes that you're able to then sort them out and place them, and then get on a microphone and communicate to the crowd why it is that you've placed those animals the way that you have. Okay. Self-discipline is on here because, as I mentioned in the slide before, practice makes perfect. And so I know a lot of our youth that are really, really good at livestock judging. They are always practicing. Okay. They're always looking at animals. They're always asking people's opinions. They're always learning from judges. They're always traveling around to participate in competitions so they can see how well their ideals are lining up with judges' ideas as well. Okay. And then when we get into our leadership and our confidence skills, okay, as you can imagine, as you practice these things and you start to master being a good judge, that confidence starts to come, as well as being able to be a good leader. You've got to have all those skills to be able to be good at implementing all those types of things together. Okay, so I want you always to think about those types of things when you ask yourself, why is it that I'm doing this, right? We obviously have to have a love for livestock, but there's a lot of these skills that come into play for you. One of the things that I wanted to talk about is dressing for success. Okay. Um, I don't think that we need to go and put on an Armani suit when we're out working our sheep, right, or our cattle, by any means. But when we go to a competition, I bring this up right now just because we want to be best dressed. We want to be as uniformed as we can as a team. There's just something that really sets a team apart and makes a difference as a judge, especially when I'm a judge that's receiving the oral reasons from you guys, which is essentially you telling me how you placed a class, and then I give you a score on it. When you show up and you're in like a blazer and you've got a nice pair of jeans on, and you've got a nice belt and buckle and some boots, right? You've come dressed for success. And oftentimes when you come and you're dressed as a team and you look really good, that can serve as an intimidation factor as well for a lot of your competitors. Okay, so never forget to dress appropriately. Again, normally when we go to these competitions, not necessarily a practice, but when we're competing, we're wearing our buckles, we're wearing our boots, we're wearing nice jeans, nice shirt, and potentially a blazer. Okay. If you're an FFA member, you'd be wearing your full FFA dress. 4-H, you're probably not going to show up in your white shirt and your patch like you would show in. That's more reserved for the show ring. In this case, you'd be wearing a nice blazer and a top there. So hopefully that makes sense for you guys. I bring that up just because we've always, and it's right here in the front of my slides, because it's something we always forget. We talk so much about how we judge and why we judge and what we're looking for that we miss this piece. And so I just wanted to make sure that that was something in the forefront of your mind when you do go and you try and participate in some of these competitions. Dress the part. Okay. Here's some examples of what that looks like. Again, ladies, a nice blouse, blazer or cardigan, dress pants, boots. Hair does need to be groomed and manicured, and stray away from big or multiple sets of jewelry. And let me tell you why. Sometimes when we get nervous and we're given our reasons, or we're in a judging competition, if we've got a bunch of bracelets on or dangly things like that, we rattle them and we don't realize it. A judge is going to pay attention to that when you're given those reasons, and it can be distracting. Okay. So make sure that you think about those types of things. Even I always go as far as to say, if you have naturally long hair that might fall into your face to where you're always having to get it out of your face, it's not a bad idea to maybe pull it up or have it out of the way. And I've taken hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of reasons over my career. And so these are just some things that I've noticed that I think would help people out to do a little bit better. Guys, you're going to be wearing a solid or striped button-down shirt, a tie, sports coat or blazer. press, dress, pants, boots, and again, hair needs to be groomed, facial hair needs to be manicured. So those are kind of some of the things that we look to want to do. Again, I bring this up, you guys are thinking, gosh, why is he talking about this? Well, it does make a big difference when you're competing, when you really have dressed the part. Okay. So do we have any questions? I sometimes get excited about this stuff and get rolling. Are there any questions that you guys have about what we should dress like or how we should look before we get into the actual livestock evaluation pieces? Okay, I'm not seeing anything come up and I'm not seeing anything in the chat. So as long as that's the case, I'm going to keep moving forward. Cool. And don't be afraid to put something in the chat if there is a question that comes up. I'll try and watch that as we move forward, okay? So let's talk a little bit more about livestock evaluation and what that looks like, okay? So there's three things that we want to start with that we want to pay attention to. And again, this is a crash course, but when we get a lamb, a hog, a steer, a goat, whatever it may be that we're looking at, these are the three things that we're going to cover. And we're going to get more into detail here, but I want you to remember these three things. So number one is their structure. So when you think about structure, we're looking at feet and legs. We're looking at their skeletal structure. Okay, we're looking at that overall just that foundation of their bone that really puts that animal together, okay? Then we move into muscle. And muscle is really important because we have to remember that muscle is the meat and that's what we eat, okay? And so when we have a really good structured animal, we're going to be able to layer that muscle onto that structure and maximize the amount of muscle that can be expressed on that animal, okay? So they all really kind of go together, that structure piece, the muscle piece. And then we get into the third factor, which is leanness or correctness of finish. Okay. How many of you guys, if you want to type into the chat, think that it's important to have some fat on our market animals? Do you guys want to respond into the chat really quick? If you think it's important, say yes or no. Do you think it's important to have some fat on our market animals? Good. I'm seeing some yeses. Paisley says yes, yes. Good. Okay. Now, does somebody want to take a guess as to why it's important? You're right. It's important that we have some fat on our market animals. Does anybody want to take a guess as to why that's important? Somebody want to say that in the chat? Why is it important? So the answer is yes, but why? Why do we have to want to have some fat on them? Good. I don't know who John Deerman is, but you've got it correct. So it's to get marbling. That's right. So when we are looking at external fat, it's generally an indicator of internal muscular fat, which is marbling. And that internal muscular fat, which is called marbling, is what gives us that good flavor. Okay, so we actually want our steaks and we want our meat to have some of that fat within it so that we get a really good flavor when we're eating our pork chops or our ribeye steak or our lamb chops, whatever that may look like, okay? So really, really good there. Now, is it possible to have an animal that's too fat? Yeah, it is. The answer is yes. We've got to be extra careful that our animals aren't too fat because we can have an adverse effect, which means that if they're too fat, we can have poor taste quality. We can have stuff be too chewy. So we've got to be extra careful about that. And we'll talk about what that looks like as we're analyzing those types of things. But I want you to remember, again, we look at structure, feet and legs, muscle, and then the correctness of finish. Now, as we look at these things, one of the things that I want to in our crash course here mention is that we've got to know the parts of the animals and their locations. Okay. Now, do you guys think that this is something that's just going to happen naturally, and you're just going to know exactly what needs to what part of every animal is and what we call it, or do you think you're going to need to practice? You're probably going to need to practice, right? and you're going to need to look and you're going to need to study about what those things are. And part of the reason why it's important to know the terms is because if you see something like this poor little sheep right here, okay, it would be important if you were judging a class to be able to identify, okay, that this is an underbite or sometimes what's called monkey mouth, okay? And I use this as an example because if I had a pen of 4 sheep that you were judging, and I was asking you to not only place the class, but also give a reasons assessment on them as to why you placed them, I, as a judge, would hopefully be waiting for you to talk about how this animal has monkey mouth or um, has a jaw such as that which is an underbite. Okay, so those are the kind of things that you're going to want to know. You're going to want to know where their loin is. You're going to want to know where their hip loin junction is. You're going to want to know what the hind saddle is. You're going to want to know the correct terminology of their feet and legs. So where their pasterns are, where their hoofs are, okay, where their knees are, where their joints are. You're going to want to know where the brisket is. You're going to want to know what a top line is, okay? These are all types of terminology that, again, we're not going to go over all of them tonight, but the more that you learn and know, the easier it's going to be for you and your mind to know what you're looking for and how to describe it, okay? And again, the important parts of difference of meat and breeding animals, you'll want to understand what that looks like as well. So let's dive into structure, okay? And we've got an example of a steer slide here for now, and we'll get into some other things. But when we talk about structure, remember I talked about feet and legs, and I talked about that overall skeletal structure, okay? So now, why, can somebody tell me why it's important that the feet and legs, you guys can see up here that we have a correct version of what those feet and legs should be. Here in the center, we have correct example of that. Why is it important that our feet and legs are correct? What happens if we get a bow-legged steer or a knock-kneed steer or a splayed toe steer or even a pigeon-toed steer? Does anybody want to type into the chat and tell me why? Or actually, you know what? There's few of us enough on here. If somebody even wants to unmute, you want to tell me why it would be important that we look at that structural correctness and what would happen maybe as we look at steers that maybe have these leg issues, what might happen as they get bigger? Does anybody want to take a guess? It's okay if you don't know. I'll tell you. Okay. So as these animals get bigger, you can imagine with you guys in your 4-H projects, whether we have them in our 4-H projects or we have them in a feedlot, if a steer is bow-legged or knock-kneed or splay-footed or pigeon-toed, the heavier that they get, right, as they grow and they start to fatten out and they start to get bigger, the harder it's going to be for that skeletal structure on their legs to actually hold up that weight. And so they're going to end up having a harder time walking and a harder time moving. They're going to end up having a harder time being able to actually get around and get to the feed bunk, which in turn is going to make it so that they're not as good at gaining weight, gaining muscle, putting on that fat and finish, and being an overall good animal. So those are some things we got to look at. Yep, good. John Deerman said it might affect the growing process and affect the meat, and that's exactly right. Okay, so those are some things we got to think about, right? Oftentimes you're thinking, oh, it's not that big of a deal. But when you are going to select your animals, those are some things we've really got to look at. Okay, and you can look at them straight on, as you can see these views, or you can look at them from the side, and you can see that we have some buck kneed right here. We have one that's at the back of the knee, so calf kneed. You guys can see those types of things. And a big one that we see a lot of times, if you see right down here on this weak pasterns example, those animals will get so heavy that their pasterns will start to give. And that is one definitely that's a notable thing. And so as you're judging a class, again, this is a crash course today, But as you're judging a class, those are some things that you want to pay extra close attention to, because that might be if you have two really good animals, but maybe one has some structural issues. That might be the difference of that placing for that judge. All right, now as we look at market lambs specifically, there's some characteristics that we want to look at. So as we look at structure, okay, we want to look at good feet and legs, okay? We want to make sure that we don't have any of the issues that we saw on the slide before. And a lot of those terms that we saw on that slide before, we can use those with all of the different species. Okay, so a cow or a calf can be knock-kneed, a lamb can be knock-kneed, a hog can be knock-kneed. Okay, a goat can be as well. They can be pigeon-toed, splay-footed, all of those types of things. A lot of those terminologies transfer through all the species. So we want to make sure we look from the ground up and we start and we make sure that that lamb's got all of those right parts and pieces structurally, okay? Then we're going to look into muscle. And some places where we look for muscle are over their top line. Okay, so you can see right here, it talks about a straight top line. So the top line generally starts from that crease in the neck and it moves all the way back to the dock. Okay, so we want them to have a straight and level top line, but we also want them to be muscular and massive in that top line. Okay, we want them to have a fairly muscular foreshoulder, but we don't want it to be excessive because we want them to be muscular there and still trim and clean. We want them to have a full, thick, muscular leg and hind saddle. Okay. Those are the general areas that we identify that muscle. Okay. So if you walk up onto a class of animals and you have 4 of them there and you're able to start to compare them, you're going to look at their structure. Remember with those 3 things, structure first, then you're going to look at the muscle and you're going to say, okay, this one's got a lot more width on that top line. I can handle them down that. It feels like we've got a lot more pop of that muscle. Looks like we have some more muscle in that foreshoulder and especially maybe under that leg in that hind saddle area. Okay. And so that's where you go with your eyes first. Okay. The next thing that you want to look at is you want them to be clean and trim. Okay, so now we're getting into that fat analysis, right? The finish analysis. So we want them to have a clean brisket. That brisket underline is right up here in the front. We want them to be clean there and not be wasty, what we call wasty. So have an extra fat and build up underneath there. We want them to have a trim shoulder. So we want them to be kind of slender and not have a lot of fat there. A slender, youthful neck and head. And then we want them to be able to have a shallow chest floor and a deep rear flank. Now, one of the things that we can do, which is hard to do over Zoom, is we can actually handle a lot of these animals and we can feel for touch over the foreribs of the lamb. Can you guys actually see my cursor? I want to make sure that you can see it. When I put my cursor up there on the slide, can you see it? Can I get a thumbs up? You can see it. Good. Okay. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't pointing into the dark. Thank you. Okay. So this forerib area right here, if we want to handle that and feel that, I'm going to teach you guys a lesson. So if I can't see y'all because your cameras aren't on, that's okay. But I want you to hold your hands out like this. Okay. If you feel over that forerib and it feels like your fingers right here, chances are that lamb's actually not fat enough. Okay. If you feel it just like this part of your hand right here, and it feels like that, it's probably too fat. Okay. But if you feel just like the back of your hand right there, where you can feel a little bit of bone, but still some coverage, that's about how that forerib should feel right there. Now you have to be extra careful when you go up to handle lambs because lambs have an actual liquid. It's a liquid fat while they're alive. Okay, it's very different than most of the other species, and so if you push really hard, you're actually going to end up feeling this instead of this. So you got to be pretty tender in how you feel right there. Enough firmness that you can get a good feel. But that's how you can tell if you got the right amount of fat cover on a lamb, okay? So again, those are some of the very basic things that we look for when we're looking for an ideal market sheep. Are there any questions? I haven't seen anything pop up, but before we move on to another species, any questions that of clarification, anything that you might want to know? Okay, if anything pops up, let me know. Okay, market goats. Market goats are going to be very similar to our lambs, okay? Big level top, wide, deep, and long in their loin area. Okay, so just some terminology right in through here, the shoulder into this area right here, we call that the rack. Then we get back into this area and we call that the loin, okay? And those are different cuts of market meat, of meat in our market animals, okay? We want them to have an expressive rack, really, really wide, big shaped rack into a big, big, heavy, wide shaped loin, okay? Now, goats, I'm going to tell you this right now. They originated, especially the Boer goat. This is an example of a Boer goat. The Boer goats originated in Africa, and they actually are a browsing animal, which means that they eat shrubs and they eat bushes and they eat all sorts of things, okay? And essentially, because of that, these goats have a different setup in their hind saddle. If you can see, I'm going to flip back here. Do you see how that lamb is really level and straight off the top and right all the way off to their dock? If you see this goat, we get here and we go level top and then we kind of round off a little bit. If a lamb rounds off like that, we would call them sloped, or we would say that they're not level topped. But goats are different because they actually are rounded off that way so that they can stand up better on their hind legs to reach and browse from the trees and the plants that they would eat in the where they originated in Africa. Okay, so there are folks that are doing a really good job breeding these goats, and they're leveling out those top lines a little bit better. But that's probably again, this one's a really good type of a goat, and he just rounds off a little bit there. I just wanted to let you know that in our crash course today that it's okay if they round off a hair on the goats in the goat species, just because that is just a natural thing that they do. Now we want them to have a well-muscled leg. Okay, we call this the barrel area. We don't want them to be fat. We want them to have a smooth shoulder. We want to be trim right here in that brisket area, long trim neck. And then we want those feet and legs that we talked about structurally really strong and square under them. Now, different than all of the other species is the goat when it comes to the fat or the finish evaluation. Okay, remember our number 3. Goats are different from all the species because they internally develop their fat first, and then it becomes external. So what that means is if you can actually feel a bunch of fat on a goat when you handle it very similarly to what we talked about with a lamb, that goat is way too fat, because that means that his whole inside is full of fat and his outside is full of fat now too, and a lot of the weight that goat is carrying that's being weighed on the scale is probably more fat than it is anything else. So we really want a trim barrel, trim midsection, trim type of a goat. But we really want that rack and that loin to be super expressive, because that's a really, really good indicator of that muscularity there along the top, and then also on their leg. Another thing that I'll teach you guys that's kind of just standard in our goat evaluation is we use our eyes a lot more, especially for the hind saddle. With lambs, you'll see if you ever have me judge or I come and I help to evaluate, I'm actually going to feel that lower leg of a lamb to identify the expressive muscle that's there. We don't do that on the goats. We feel them over the top. We feel their fat cover, but we don't actually handle that leg. Part of the reason is because goats hate that. I don't know if they're ticklish or whatever, but they go and they freak out. Okay, and so we handle them over the top. We step back and we use our eyes to determine maybe who's got more muscling on that leg area. They're okay, but again, level topped, good structure, good feet and legs, and heavy muscled. Okay. All right, now we're going to move into our market hogs. Market hogs are going to be very similar. This is actually one of my favorite pictures over here on the right of just a good rear view of a market hog, okay? Really thick muscular hams, okay? That's that hind saddle area, okay, and that rump, okay? Really deep, okay, and true muscle right here. And this area right in here is an area I want you always to pay attention to, because true muscle and actually too much fat are two things that are hard to determine on a hog when you're looking at this area. Okay, sometimes, and you guys will laugh, but they can get what I call diaper bum, which means that they're actually more full of fat right there than they are muscle. And it kind of gets flappy. You guys know what I'm talking about if you have siblings or whatnot and they get their little diaper that's full and it kind of flaps around when they're running around, right? Pigs can get that too. And so we got to be careful to say, well, gosh, that one's got a really big ham. We got to make sure that it actually has a ham that's got a lot of that true muscling on it. Okay, so those are the types of things that we look at there in that rear view there. Now you guys can see this is a really good hind visual of that top line. Okay, so we have a really, really nice rack into a loin. We come into the ham loin junction here. We want that to be super level and we want it to be super expressive. So as you're evaluating those pigs, you want to get behind them and look, and you want to use your eyes to determine, hey, who's wider? Who's got more expressive muscle there, right? Is it real muscle? Have we got too much fat? Okay, and those are kind of the things we want to look at. Now, as we come to this side profile look, there's a couple of indicators with fat, okay? And then I'm going to go back into some structure things. But we want them right here in the jowl area, okay? So this is right underneath kind of their chin and their jowl area. We want that to be really clean, okay? If we get a lot of fat deposit right there, that's a really big indicator to you guys that maybe that pig is a little too fat, okay? Also, we get up here into their blades. You can see as this hog's right here, you can see that shoulder blade that's actually drawn into there. As they move around, you want to still be able to see some blade motion. If you have a hog that's too fat, they'll move around and you won't be able to see that blade kind of popping up. Okay, and so that's important. Now, could they be too skinny? Not enough fat? Yeah. So if there's a huge predominance of that blade, you might say, oh, we'd like to get a little bit more fat on this hog, okay? But we do want that to be expressive enough that we can see it. We want a level top line, okay? We want there to be a deep flank, okay? And we want those feet placement to be really good. And pigs' feet placement is really hard to study unless you get down to their level, okay? Sheep and goats and cattle are elevated enough that we can look at them by stepping back and taking a look. But pigs, we got to really get down. Sometimes when I judge pigs and I'm in a kind of a critical class, I actually crouch clear down on the ground so I can watch them move and I can watch their feet and legs as far as that structure observation, okay? Now, I do want to talk a little bit about this general area as far as a deep flank, okay? That means we want that pig to be really deep, and actually we want him to probably, this is a really good diagram, but if it were me, I'd actually want that hog in this diagram to actually have a little bit more depth of flank. Do you guys know why it's so important that this lower third region is deep and full? Who can tell me what cut of meat comes from this region right here? Bonus points if you can tell me. Anybody want to throw it into the chat or unmute and take a guess? What cut of meat comes from right here? It's probably my favorite. Oh, does somebody want to take a guess?
I was just gonna say, if you guys don't know, it's a really popular breakfast item.
Thanks, Reagan. Looks like John Deere man got it. It's bacon. Okay, so what's interesting is for the longest time, our pork chops up here on the loin area were our most expensive cut of meat, but bacon has by far over the past couple of years taken the lead. Okay, and so we've really changed the way that we like our market hogs to look, and that depthening of that flank and really kind of having some softness around that barrel area and really having that kind of bred into them that way gives us a lot more bacon. Okay, and that's really, really important for that type of a hog. Okay, again, we want them to be flexible in their hock. We want them to have good feet and legs. Okay, we want them to have that width to them. And we do want them to have some length. There's some different styles that are coming around that have been around for a couple of years that are super, super wide and thick, but they don't have a lot of length to them, okay? And so that's something that you oftentimes as a judge have to evaluate, and you have to say, well, maybe this one's a lot longer, but not near as thick or muscular, and this one's a lot shorter, but it has a lot more muscle. And you just have to, when you're judging these animals, decide in your own mind, well, I'm going to go with this versus this because I think this animal's got maybe a little bit more to it than the other one does all together as a package, right? But ideally, we're looking for all the things. We've got some width, we've got some depth, we've got some length, and that's how we look at it. All right. Beautiful market steer right here, okay? Same type of analysis, okay? Very similar, or a thick, strong, level top, super wide and expressive, okay? One of the things that we tend to get stuck on these really thick steers is we don't have an elongated, really pretty neck set, okay? Something that you want to try and have is just a pretty neck like this steer does. It comes and it ties right into that strong top line and comes out. We want them to be super neat and trim, okay, down here in the throat and the brisket. That's oftentimes for you guys a first indicator. If we've got a super full, heavy brisket, okay, that flops around a ton, that's an indicator that maybe that steer's a little too heavy. And I'll tell you that most of the time, goats and sheep in your judging classes, you're actually able to go and handle them. The steers, oftentimes, they don't let you do that. And so you want to actually look at these external indicators like a giant big brisket, okay? Maybe even a really, really full flank, okay? If it's super, super full and you can see that it's fatty, those might be some indicators that that the steer might be just too fat, okay? Back to muscle. We want a long, level, and wide full rump and a long, deep, thick, and muscular quarter down here. A lot of times we'll see steers that have really big tops, and they tend to want to give up down in here in this hind saddle and this thick, muscular lower quarter here. They give up that overall expression, and that's one thing that you want to look at, and especially you want to take all sorts of different angles to look at it. So you want this side profile look. You want to go from behind and take a look as well to make sure that that's actually traveling and as expressive as you want it to be. We want them to be trim in their middle, but we want them to be really wide and well sprung in their rib shape, okay? Smooth in their shoulder, and we want them to really be balanced. Okay, probably out of a lot of the different species that we look at, it's easy for a steer to be beautiful and balanced, and it's really easy for them to not be. Sometimes we'll get to where we have super muscular, thick shoulders, and we have a really, really big, heavy-duty fore shoulder and front third in the steer. But boy, we get back to our middle and our back third, and we start to lose that overall muscle shape. Okay. And vice versa. Sometimes we'll have a huge hind third and we'll get up towards the front and we just don't have that balance. We want them to really, really have that deep, 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 well-sprung rib shape. And then we want them to have a flank that matches that. This is actually one of my favorite drawings. This is a really, really pretty steer as far as one that you might look at as an ideal look for a market steer as you guys are going out and judging. All right, so let's talk about, now that we've talked about some of those characteristics, let's talk about what a judging class looks like, okay? So a class of livestock generally consists of 4 animals, okay? And in breeding classes, there usually are one particular breed. So you may have, like, for example, in a market class, you may have a Duroc hog, and you may have a Hampshire hog, and you may have a Poland China hog. You might have all these different kinds of breeds, okay? In a market lamb class, you may have a Hampshire, you may have a Suffolk, you may have a Dorset, you may even have a Southdown, right? There's different breeds of sheep, hogs, all sorts of cattle, and even goats that may be in these livestock classes. But in our breeding classes, generally they're more of a standard breed. So you might have some Bordeaux's, or you might have some what they might call Weathershire or Club Lamb ewes. You may have Dorset ewes. You may have Angus heifers. You may have Charolais heifers. You may have some Hereford heifers, right? And you may sometimes even have bulls. These are kind of some of the things that we look at and generally line up as far as classes. But on most occasions, you're going to have 4 animals in those classes. A livestock judging contest is simply a collection of various classes of livestock. So sometimes you might go and there might be 8 different classes, and those consist of, a couple of breeding classes and a couple of market classes. You may have a whole bunch that is heavy on one species that day because that's what they were easily able to get. So you may have a bunch of sheep and some goats and some steers and no pigs because it's hard to get pigs that time of year. Or you may have vice versa. You may end up in a place where they have a ton of pigs and you only have a couple of the other things to look at. So those are the types of things that you always need to be prepared for, is that you may not know exactly what's going to be there, but you just got to go ready to judge them and ready to understand what those types of things look like. Okay. As we line up animals, one of the things that's important to know if they're tied up is that the animal on the left, on your left-hand side, is always considered animal number 1. And then we go 1 through 4, so left to right, and that's always the case. So always left, number 1, always right, number 4. Now, if they're in a pen where they can move around, which is generally the case for your market hogs and sometimes even your breeding animals, generally the committee that's putting on your judging contest is going to mark them for you. So you're going to have actually spray painted numbers or lines on the animals that indicate which number they are so that you can place them accordingly. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that placing looks like. Okay. So as you guys practice, I always want you to remember that you need to practice like you're going to play. So if you go and look at classes of livestock or you go and you compete, always do your very best and put the effort into it so that every time that you're in a setting, you do things the right way. Okay. So for example, in a competition setting, as you approach a class of livestock, you'll probably be told to turn your back towards the class and to label your placing cards, okay? So as you do that, just get used to that. It's a very good standard of procedure. And why would they have you turn your back to the class? It's because they don't want to give you an advantage of extra time looking at the class more so than anybody else. So those are some things that you want to consider and look at. Put your name on your cards. We're going to talk about cards here in just a second, show you an example of what they look like. But you need to put your name on your card and mark your choice for your classes every time. I'm going to tell you a story. We had some a livestock, or it was a horse judging team, excuse me, that made it all the way to the Denver Nationals from Utah. And they were really good. And one of the girls got in a quick hurry, judged the class and forgot to mark her card and turn it in. And they ended up, I think, 2nd overall nationally, would have won, but because that card wasn't turned in, it didn't count, and it caused a DQ for that class. And so we want to make sure that we always are practicing like we're going to play. So, and even when you're practicing at home, if you guys print off some livestock cards, whatever it is, write your name on them, mark them, and get in the habit of doing that, okay? Do not begin judging until you're told to start. Again, if you're in a serious judging situation and you do that, sometimes you can get disqualified depending upon the competition, okay? Now, once the time is in on the class, you'll probably have 10 to 15 minutes to judge the class, okay? And this depends upon the competition. Sometimes, depending upon the time frame that they have and their judges, they might tell you have 8 minutes. They might tell you have longer, okay? But what you need to do is within 2 to 3 minutes remaining, you need to make sure you mark your card. Okay, so don't mark it initially because you want to make sure you do some evaluation. But when you have some extra time there towards the end, be aware of it and make sure that you mark that card. Okay, so this is an example of a placing card. You guys may have, you guys may see different cards. There's a couple of different ones, but this one is generally what you're going to be seeing. Okay. And you're going to see right here that you have all these different options from A to X of all of the different possibilities that you could place a class. Okay. So for example, if you walked up on a class and you thought that the number 1 steer was the best steer and the number 4 steer was the worst, but you really liked really liked the number 3 steer next and the number 2. So you didn't go 1, 2, 3, 4. You went 1, 3, 2, 4 and how you placed your steers. You're going to see, look right here, and you're going to see that C matches up with how you want to place your class. So 1, 3, 2, 4. Okay. So you may circle C, you may fill in a bubble depending upon the competition. Okay, it's how you would mark it, but it's pretty much the same general idea. Okay, and essentially what happens is a judge or a judging team will go through before you are able to go through as a contestant, and they will evaluate all of the animals. Your job as a livestock judging team or a contestant is to try and get as close to that judge or that judging team's opinions as much as you possibly can. So you're going to try and identify which is the best steer, which is the best lamb, the best goat, the best hog, based upon those characteristics that we talked about quickly earlier. And you're going to try and line them up the best that you can in comparison to those, what the opinion is of those judges. Okay. Now, we recognize that this is an opinion type of a contest. So sometimes a judge is going to say, well, you know what? I actually like that class 1, 2, 3, 4. And you placed them 1, 3, 2, 4. But what they do is they have a thing called cuts, and a cut is an amount of points that they're going to decide that they're going to deduct in between those missed placings. Now, what that means is, for example, let's say that I'm judging and I decide that the 2 and 3 steers are actually really close. But I think that 3 steer is a little bit better than that 2 steer. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, maybe I'm only going to give a cut of only 2 points because I could see how somebody would say that they like this one more than another. Now, sometimes as a judge, I'll go into a class and I think that there's one that's way better than all the rest, and that the other 3 in the class don't even get close to that one that's there. And so I might say, I'm going to cut 6 or 7 points if you didn't put this one up at the top. Okay. So again, we mark our cards and then we use those types of comparables in order to get a score at the end of the competition. And again, this is just an example because there will be different cards, but generally as you go to these competitions and you practice, you'll have somebody there that'll tell you, hey, this is how we're going to mark them today. So when we're in this judging setting, we need to develop a system for evaluation. Each time you judge a class of livestock or analyze a group of them, you should rely on the system of observing them. So here's a couple of my tips for you. Stand back and allow enough room between yourself and the animals so you can see all of them at one time. Because, right, we're comparing them, right? We're judging them and we're placing them. And we've got to be able to make those differentials as far as which ones we think are better than the others. This allows you to make better observations. It also allows you to do a better job comparing. Okay, so stand back. Sometimes we get anxious, we get too close. We're not able to see all of those structural, muscle, and fat and finish comparables that we talked about earlier on. Okay? 3 angles. Try to look at the class from the side, from the rear, from the front, and you should compare each animal to the others, right? And then as you're also comparing them to the others, remember to compare them to some ideals that you can picture into your mind. So as we talked about and showed some of those examples, what are ideal animals and which one in that class maybe works its way closer to what that ideal actually looks like. Okay? Big things place the class. Okay. Always look for and analyze the good and bad characteristics of each animal. Make sure you place the class according to the big things. Okay. So those 3 things that we talked about are big things. So if you have a steer that's out there and just has correct structure, big heavy top, big hind saddle, big muscularity, right? And feels like they're not too wasty or too fat. Okay. And in comparison to all the other ones, just really has an extra set of width, extra length, extra expression over that top line, right? Those are big things. And you need to say, you know what? That's probably for sure the biggest and best steer in the class, right? Small things are where we get to where we have to ideally make those choices that are harder, which is going to be more of a personal preference. So, hey, you know what? These steers are really similar in their type and kind. They seem to have the same type of width. When I look at them on the side, gosh, you know what? Maybe this one's structure isn't as good. It's a little less on its pastures, right? It's a little weaker there. So I'm going to put the other one ahead of it, and that's going to be the reason that I do it, right? Chances are, if you can point out and see those types of things, the judging team or the judge that's making the final decisions are also going to see those types of things too. Now, as we go through and we judge, we have the opportunity to take notes, okay? And oftentimes, one of the reasons that we want to take notes is because we are going to be expected, especially for our senior divisions, to give those reasons that we talked about earlier today. Now, if you can imagine, you may see 8 to 10 different classes of animals, but generally you're going to be told before you start which of those classes you're going to need to give reasons on. So they may say, hey, we're going to do reasons on breeding does. We're going to be doing reasons on market wethers, and we're going to do a set of reasons on our market hogs. Okay. So they may give you those 3 classes. They may give you 1 class. They may even give you more of the sets of reasons that you're going to be giving, just depending upon the overall competition. And so you can imagine, after you've looked at 8 to 10 different classes, that it may be a little bit difficult to remember everything that you saw. And by the way, you normally give your reasons at the end after you've seen everything. And so that's why we want to take a good set of notes, okay? And a good set of notes, again, is going to help you to be able to recall or make a mental picture of the class you had in mind. It's going to allow you to be able to write down some terms like we talked about: top line, hind saddle, muscularity, fitness, overall quality of balance, structure, all of those things that we just talked about. It's going to allow you to take some notes so you can form the habit of being able to utilize that terminology in your reasoning. Okay. So some pointers. List the main points for each pair of animals. So you're going to start off with your top pair, right? And in our last example, when we looked at that card, we said that we were going to place the class 1, 3, 2, 4. So why is it that you like number 1? What are all of the amazing things that you think are putting that steer at the top? Okay. Why do you like number 3 next? Why do you like number 2 next? And then lastly, why do you like number 4? Now, we can oftentimes, as we get towards the bottom of the class, be awful critical of our last placing animals. It's really good to say, hey, I really like the fact that this is a really good, tall, good-footed steer structurally, but maybe just doesn't have the overall muscle today, right? So we're able to say some good things about them, but maybe talking incomparably, we say maybe why it is that we're not going to place them as high on the class as maybe the other ones that were there. Okay. But if you put out those talking points, those are really good. The other thing is you're taking a good set of notes that's important is use identifiers so you can remember what those animals look like. So maybe that number 1 steer that you're putting on top was a black baldy. Got white on his face. Maybe he's got white on his belly. Okay. And so that's a really good identifier. And so you can say, we're going to start the class off with number 1 steer, which is the black baldy. And boy, this steer has this. He has a big top line. He has a really, really deep quarter, really well balanced from tip to tail, right? You can talk about those types of things. But a lot of times, if you can mark down identifiers that sets that steer apart, it's really intriguing for somebody that's being on the other side listening to your reasons, because they know that you actually listened or viewed visibly that steer and what it looked like and what's different there. Okay. Sometimes we can identify different colored ear tags. Sometimes we can identify little things like that to just set them apart, so that it's more than just saying, I place the class 1, 3, 2, 4, right? You can go into those identifiers. And here's a really good example of a notes format that somebody shared with me, and I really, really like it. You can see that we put this class of market steers here, and here they've got them 1, 4, 2, 3. Again, they've got those identifiers. That number 1 calf was a red baldy. The number 2 is a Hereford marked calf. There's a black baldy in 3, and number 4 was black. Okay. They like that number 1 is heaviest muscles. So that's one thing they like. What's its fault? It drops from its hooks to its pins. So what that means is that instead of having that really straight topped hind saddle all the way in from its shoulders all the way back to its tail, it drops a little bit so it slopes off a hair. Okay. You go down there and you say, okay, what one's next? That 4 steered, nice profiling, cleaner neck, leveler rumped, but it has some faults. Okay. Narrow based, bare ribs. Okay. Probably going to grade more choice than it is going to maybe be more prime, like they're figuring the baldy is. They're saying that red baldy's heavier muscled, thicker top, more correctly conditioned, okay, than maybe that number 4. But you guys can see how these notes and examples would help you to talk about why it is that you place the class and what your thoughts are, okay? Now, this is an example. I'm going to tell you right now, this is an example of probably what a collegiate level, so a college level judge is going to mark down, or maybe a really, really high leveled senior in high school. But if you can start to practice right like this and start to get this type of a system down as far as your note taking is concerned, it's really going to make a difference in how you're able to give those reasons. And even though reasons are uncomfortable and there's something that we don't like to do, they count. You get a score of 50 for every reasons class that you give. At least 50 is the maximum amount of points. You'll be given a score from the judge based upon how you give them. And oftentimes in your top 10 to 15 individuals in a judging competition, the reasons are what sets the winner apart from everybody else. So it's important that you learn how to do this. The other reason that this is important is, if you can imagine, we're asking you to take 4 animals here and make a difference in how you're going to move them, place them. As you guys get older and get into judging and you get into a big county fair or state fair or national show, you're going to be expected to memorize in your mind why it is that you're sorting animals, in a class of 20 or more. And so you got to get used to being able to do comparables and saying why it is that you're doing those types of things. All right, simple tips. Don't forget the obvious. Don't waste time. Remember, you've only got a certain amount of time when you're getting into that judging competition. See the animals exactly as they are. And I put this on there because I am the biggest guilty person of this. Sometimes I overanalyze animals when I'm judging in a competition. In fact, one year I lost a state competition because I overanalyzed sheep, which is what we raise. I got perfect scores in every other of the species, and the one species that I should know the best, I actually goofed up a little bit because I overanalyzed them. So really make sure that you go in there and see them as they are. And remember, the big things like we talked about are generally what place those classes. Okay. Make it your own. When you guys are doing your reasons or you're taking your notes, use your own terminology. Make it fun, right? You want to be correct in your anatomy and all the things that you're describing, but it's okay to say, boy, I sure like this one, or this one really makes it, makes my eyes, focus a little bit more on it, or whatever it is that you want to say. Those types of things are fun, and they make it your own. If you guys do have a break in a competition, make use of your time. Don't go and piddle around and goof around and chase one another around. go over your notes, practice your regions, visualize those animals in your mind, right? Take that time if you're given it to practice up before you go and sit in front of a judge, and then make sure. Remember, I told you this a couple of times, but make sure to mark your card and turn your card in. It doesn't do you any good to do all this practicing and be the best judge in the world if you're not actually going in and marking your card and turning it in, okay? So we're going to do some practicing now, and I want you guys to use the chat, okay? But I want you to take a look. We're only, because of time tonight, I don't want to hold you too long. But I want to have you guys maybe take a minute for each one of these classes. And I want you to type into the chat how you would place these, okay? So these are market hogs. You got some barrows and you got some gilts in here, which is okay because they're all market hogs. I want you to tell me what it is that how you would place them, okay? So go ahead. I'm going to set my alarm here for 1 minute and go ahead and put your placings into the chat. All right. I'm seeing some good things coming in here. Really, really good. Okay. We got 2, 3, 4, 1, 4, 3, 1, 2, 1, 3, 2, 4, 2, 4, 3, 1, 4, 3, 1, 2. Okay. All right. I really love that you guys had the courage to go ahead and put that into the chat. Okay. This is actually a pretty hard class of market hogs. Okay. Hard for a couple of reasons. Who can tell me what you think about just only seeing them on one angle? So is it easy to judge these pigs just looking at them from the side right here? Anybody want to unmute or tell me in the chat? Was it easy for you to judge them? Huh? All right. The markings can throw things off. I like that comment in there. Yep. Okay. What else? What else? Let's see. You want to see them from the back, Holly. I agree. And that's exactly what I kind of tricked you guys because this is hard to judge when we're only looking from the side. Okay. So this is a perfect example. If we talked about it, yep, Stephanie's saying no, need to see the hind to see the width and the ham. Perfect. Okay. You guys are getting it. So remember how we talked about looking at all the angles, doing an evaluation, seeing all of them from that side of things. This is a perfect example. Now, can we look at them and do our best if this is all we were given? Sure we can. Okay. As we look at these and you know, and no fault of his own, this 2 pig boy, he's just not wanting to be very photogenic, right? It's really kind of hard to get a good look at him, but maybe we're looking and thinking, okay, he's got a little bit of jowl going on there. Maybe he's a little bit fatter. He looks okay structurally, but really, really hard to kind of look at him that way. So if we're given a visual like this and we are not able to see him live and it's this way, he's an awful hard one to look at, okay? We look at our number 1 hog. Pretty good top line, maybe not as deep in that loin there. Fairly decent ham, but structurally, we're getting really, really, really high on our toes, straight in our pasterns there. I would bet this hog has a harder time walking around, okay? Also, doesn't really have the depth of bone, okay, in that structure, in that foot structure to correlate really high good muscles. We're also seeing maybe just a little bit of flat-sidedness here in number 1. Okay, we come into number 3 and number 4. Okay, number 3 really trim. Okay, really kind of good in that loin area there. Maybe dips just a hair. We come down into our flank. We've got some good depth there. We've got a good expression of muscle there. And as we come up into our number 4 hog, again, really clean and trim there. Lots of muscularity expression here in that foreshoulder. Really, really strong top line. Okay, lots of expression of ham there. Really good feet and legs and a good bone that's there as well. Okay. So there's a lot of things that we can look at here when we analyze them. For me today, I think probably our most balanced and complete muscle market hog is going to be number 4. I think we then move into number 3. I just think that maybe number 3 gives up just a little bit in strength of that overall top line and maybe just doesn't have that overall expressiveness that the number 4 hog does. Number 1, we kind of come down here and I think we, in comparison to the 2, lose out on overall muscularity. And I think that we get a little flat-sided. That's going to allow us to not maybe have the overall complete package and balance that we'd like to see ahead. And then, like I said, number 2, maybe number 2 is better than number 1, but it's a really hard visual here. So if I was given these, I'd place them 4, 3, 1, 2. Okay. And again, that's my opinion, but it's an awful hard opinion when we're only looking at one visual of them. Okay. So now we're going to move on to another class. Okay. And this time we're giving you guys some different angles to look at. So this is a sheep class. Okay. We're going to give you 1 minute. This is number 1, and you can see in these squares down here. So number 1's this ewe lamb here. Here's number 1. Here's a view of her from behind. Here's a view from her on the top. Okay. And so on and so forth. So you can look at 1, 2, 3, and 4. Go ahead and put into the chat what you judge them as and see where we get there. Okay, our minute is up. Do we have some more coming in? I see that TJ's got his in. There we go. Okay, Kirsten's good. Holly's in. Stephanie's good. Okay. So how many of you guys, if you want to give me a thumbs up, liked this idea of being able to see these angles a lot more than the pigs? Okay. If you want to comment in the chat with like an emoji thumbs up or something like that, since I can't see your cameras. Oh, good. Yep, way easier. It is, isn't it? It's way, way easier. Okay. I personally, even as a judge myself, had a much easier time looking at these lambs. Okay. Now for just in essence of time, let's talk about them really quickly. Okay. What lamb do we can we easily identify as maybe our least muscled, kind of our lightest muscled type of a sheep in the class? Okay. If we look at these really closely, I think that our lightest muscled lamb in the class, and it's just because looking at all the angles, is probably going to be our number 2 lamb today. Okay. Now, interestingly enough, I think that the number 2 lamb, when it comes to structure, is probably one of the nicer sheep in the class, but just doesn't have the muscle and doesn't have the fat, right? So as we talk about those 3 components, he strikes out on 2 and he wins on 1, but he probably, you know, maybe another 30, 40 pounds is going to be a really, really, really nice weather lamb that's going to make a big impact later on. But today we're judging them on their marketability, and so probably the lightest muscled lamb in the class, probably going to follow the bottom. Which one do you guys think maybe is the most heavy muscled lamb in the class? What's the most heavy muscled lamb in the class? Do you want to type that into the chat? Which one do you think is the most heavy muscled? Okay, TJ thinks number 4. Anybody else want to challenge that? Anybody else want to comment on what you think is the heaviest muscled? Okay. Now I'm gonna say that there's probably 2 of them that are close, and that's in between 3 and 4. And if I look at them, there's some things I really like about both of them. I think that 3, okay, probably has a little bit more of a foreshoulder muscle. I think that 3 probably has a little bit better rack. And I think that the bottom right-hand corner of this slide really probably gives us a better view than most, okay? One of the things when I'm talking about overall heavy muscle, when it comes to 4 versus 3, is 4 gets a little bit narrow and shallow up here into this rack area, okay, in comparison to 3. Are they maybe fairly similar right here in this hip-loin junction? Probably, okay, as far as this picture is concerned. But which one maybe balances out and maybe just has that little bit of an extra package there? Probably going to be number 3, okay? So we've been able to identify what our tops are going to look like and what our bottom is going to look like. And we've talked about this difference of opinion in 3 and 4. Now, I could talk a lot about these sheep all day long. I think that 4 has a better looking top line in this picture, okay, on the side profile. I think that 3 might just be standing funny because he's got his leg out right there. He's not actually squared up as good. Okay, that's something to consider. Okay, but as we analyze overall muscularity comparison, I think that 3 ends up winning. Okay, I think that 2 goes down to the bottom of the class. So now we've got to decide, what are we going to do with that middle pair? Okay, we've got 4 over here, we've got 1 over here. Okay, we haven't talked a lot about 1, but I think when we look at this hind view, we can see that 1 maybe just gets a little bit more narrow base and doesn't have the overall true muscling as maybe our 4 lamb does. Okay, we also can get up here on the top of 1. I think that this picture shows off 1 just a little bit more than it should, as far as it's a little bit closer, but I don't think that 1 has that overall complete package of balance as maybe 4 does, but that's really close in comparison. So I think we would do the class 3, 4, 1, and 2, and then we would probably do a pretty decent cut of 3 or 4 points for that first pair. And we'd probably only do like 1 or 2 between 4 and 1, because I think that those are fairly comparable sheep there. Okay, so that just gives you another idea of how, as a judge, I might look at this class. Okay, we're going to do one more class for time, It's going to be this goat class, okay? We've got all the different views and angles of the goat class. I'm going to give you another minute. Go ahead and take an evaluation of these goats, and then go ahead and put your placings in the chat. All right, the alarm went off. Go ahead and put your placings in. Okay, so let's talk about these goats really quickly. Okay, again, we're going to look at them, and I'm talking out loud as I go through these as we're approaching these in a judging contest, okay? Let's look, and we're going to try and identify maybe who our top is and who our bottom is. I think that in this class, it's interesting because I think we've actually got some really nice goats. But as we look at maybe overall structure, I think we're good on our structure. We've got some fairly decent animals here. We might have our number 4 goat that toes out just a little bit in those fronts, but that's being pretty critical. Looks pretty good. And maybe even one toes out just a little bit, if you can see that right there. Okay, so we can be a little critical of that. Hey, a lot of times when we're looking at livestock and their natural stance, sometimes we can determine their overall muscularity by the way that they stand. Okay, number 1 tends to want to be pretty narrow, and I would dare say that number 1 probably just in this overall view is probably our lightest muscled goat in the class. Okay, so again, we're not knocking anybody too hard on structure, but we did say, yeah, we got some toe issues going on here, and we're narrow, and we're light muscled. So 1's probably going to fall closer towards the bottom of the class. Okay. We start analyzing which one is the heaviest muscled in the class. Okay. That one's hard to tell on these photos, right? But as I've evaluated them, I think that 3 actually ends up coming out pretty heavy muscled. Okay. Really nice view here. Really, really big rack and loin on this view as well. And then we tend to just get a really nice elongated view here of number 3 in the class right here. Okay. So probably our heaviest muscled goat, probably one of our prettier types of goats as well as far as the overall class is concerned. So we may consider him for the top. We kind of come between 2 and 4 here. 2 is a lot more stylish for me, maybe more of a youthful goat than number 4 is. Get maybe just a little full on feed right here, but I think has a really, really nice top line. Okay. Maybe just doesn't have the overall expression that this number 3 goat does, but I think in comparison for what that package is, we have a really nice balanced goat in number 2. Number 4, I think probably if we're talking pounds of product on an animal, maybe has the most, but probably is maturing in age, probably a heavier class, a weight class of goat here. Maybe wants to not have as good of a top line. Maybe starting to show just a little bit of waist as far as some fat cover here. Does have a really nice chest floor. Just maybe doesn't have that overall expressiveness, especially in this hind view of some above it. So my opinion today is we would go 3, 2, 4, and then 1. Okay, again, just an opinion. It's hard on these pictures, but it's nice to hear maybe why I was thinking that, and maybe you could see those reasons as to why we were going to do that. Okay, we're going to skip steers tonight just because of the time frame. I've almost kept you a full hour and a half. But I would encourage you guys to look at different classes and opportunities. One of the things as far as opportunities are concerned, and I don't have it here in the slide, but I would recommend there's different livestock judging programs. And so what I know Box Elder County does, they have a livestock judging team, and the county actually they have a fee for the club, and they pay for an online software called Judging Pro, and you can actually get multiple sign-ins on Judging Pro. And what Judging Pro is exactly how we just did that practice. It'll give you videos, it'll give you pictures, and then it'll allow you to judge that class. And then there will be a professional judge that has judged the class that will give you the placings and the reasons like I just gave you as to why they did what they did. And the more that you practice those types of things and you get online and you do those types of things, the better off that you'll be, just because you'll start to learn, oh yeah, I didn't see that and I see it now. You can also look on YouTube. There are some free classes on YouTube that you can look at. But there's those Judging Pro, again, judgingpro.com, a really good opportunity for you to get lots of practicing in. We do have some opportunities coming up in May. The Intermountain Livestock Judges Training will be held here in Utah this year, and it will be May 9th through the 11th, and it's down in Spanish Fork. And you have the opportunity to be taught by a professional judge. I'm a member of the committee down there, and we will bring in a professional judge that'll come through and teach you more in depth a lot of the things that we talked about today, and it'll give you a lot of the pointers and tips and things to help you be successful. The Intermountain Livestock Judges Training is a great place to go if you really are interested in upping your game and changing your level of judging. And if there's a team that you have, it doesn't matter if you're a set of juniors, intermediates, or seniors. If you guys formulate a team and you'd like to go down and practice, there's a whole a day's worth of practice and learning, and then there's an actual competition. So it'll give you an opportunity to get right in and do a competition, and have a critique, which is essentially having a judge go through after the competition and tell you why they placed the way they did and what they and what that looks like, so that you can learn. The State 4-H Classics are in June, the 24th and 25th of June. That's a great opportunity to sign up and go, and again, compete and have that opportunity to have a critique and understand why it is that things were placed the way that they were. If you also pay close attention to the State 4-H website, Jessie Hadfield, our livestock specialist, she will also be putting on various livestock judging competitions at some of the state-sanctioned livestock shows that you can get in on and go and practice. I know it's sometimes a lot of travel, but again, the more opportunity that you give yourself to practice, whether it's online or if it's in person, and you listen to those reasons and whatnot, the more finite your decisions will be, and the better off that you'll be in practicing those types of things. So I've went through a major crash course of livestock judging and why we do it and how we do it, and all those things tonight. I hope it's been helpful. I want you to know that it's a lot of fun. It gives you an opportunity to get with your friends, to look at livestock. It's a competition, so it's always fun to be competitive. And there's a lot of opportunities, not only at the local level, the state level, but if your team wins as a senior team, you actually get to go and compete in Denver at the national competition. So it's a great opportunity to get started. There's colleges all across the country that actually have collegiate judging teams that if you practice as you're young and you get really good, they'll accept you for scholarships and all sorts of things, so you can go judge livestock at a college and get your education, and get it paid for while you're judging. So lots of really cool opportunities. If there's some questions, I'll take them either through the chat now, or I'll do, you're welcome to turn your microphone on. And you may not have any questions. This may have been so much of a fire hose for you tonight that you might just be like, holy smokes, but that's it. That's livestock judging in a nutshell.
I guess I had more of a comment. First off, thank you so much, Josh, and thank you, Holly, for organizing this. But some of you kids that might not be interested in joining a livestock judging team, this is really good information for when you pick out your projects. And so I wanted to make that comment. And then another thing is, and Holly can explain it more, but we're actually going to do county contests this year in April where we're going to have livestock judging. So if that's something that you're interested in, we'll be holding that contest. So again, if you have questions, you can reach out to Holly. So those are just my 2 comments. And thank you again, Josh and Holly, for organizing this, and Josh for giving us a great presentation.
Yes, thank you so much, Josh, for sharing your time and knowledge with us tonight. And like Reagan said, we want to have some more opportunities in our county to do the livestock judging. So whether you want to practice, if any of you are interested in being on a team, let us know. We want to have more opportunities for you in this if you'd like. Also, don't forget to put your name in the chat so we can count your attendance. And then, yeah, if there's any questions for Josh, go ahead and ask him.
And one thing that I wanted to bring up to you guys, and I can't remember her name. I can see her face, but her name is skipping right now. You guys have an amazing one of your 4-H leaders up there that actually judged on a college team. And it'll come to me when we're off of this, but I'll talk to Reagan. But I do know you guys have some great resources there in the county of somebody that's actually went on to judge at a collegiate level and did a really good job. So lots of really good resources there. And hey guys, Reagan has my information. If you guys have questions that you think about later on or whatnot, please feel free to, you're welcome to always text me. You know, I'll get text questions of, hey, you know, I placed this class like this. Do you have any, you know, what do you think or whatnot? And then, like I said, please take advantage of using the resources that are online, because that really puts a lot of different classes, different kinds of animals, lots of things in front of you really quickly.
Awesome. Thank you so much again, Josh, and thank you all for attending tonight. And if there's not any other questions, we'll go ahead and end it. Okay, thank you guys.